Who is the Purple Man? This is a question that has risen since his eerie presence in the death minigames were known. 3 of the 4 death minigames features this mysterious figure. The minigame Take Cake to the Children has you taking cake to 6 children. All the while, a 7th child is outside, crying. After a while, a car pulls up and from it emerges a purple figure. It is unknown what the man actually does to the child, but what is speculated is that it ends in the child's demise. Then we have the Foxy minigame, which has you playing as Foxy in Pirate's Cove. You can walk from the stage to 5 kids 3 times. On the 3rd run, you see the purple guy, smiling. When you arrive to the kids area, they are all lifeless, presumably dead. And finally, you have Save Them, which has you playing as Freddy following the puppet. Occasionally, you'll be approached by a purple guy, which you can't escape from. When he touches you, the screen turns to blue static as opposed to the usual red, and the words "you can't" appears. This causes your game to crash. Now, the elephant in the room for this theory is the popular game theory conclusion of it being the phone guy. So let's look at the evidence. It was concluded to be this culprit because for someone to have gotten away with something of this caliber, they'd have to have extensive knowledge of the layout of the pizzeria, implying that they could have been a worker or currently employed by the establishment. In Save Them, you see a change in the character. You see the purple guy with what looks like a security badge and a phone. This has been one of the crucial tipping points for people to agree with this. But let's hold the phone, because in the same breath we can pull up this theory from evidence provided, a wider view shows there are some inconsistencies. For a start, the phone guy is never hinted to be a security guard until Five Nights at Freddy's 1 and the end of Five Nights at Freddy's 2.
When the place eventually opens again, I'll probably take the night shift myself.
I wanted to record a message for you to help you get settled in on your first night. I actually worked in that office before you. I'm finishing up my last week now, as a matter of fact.
Also, because the kids in the missing children incident were lured away, it had to have started during the open hours of the restaurant. During Save Them, there is no one else around, meaning it had to have taken place between the closing time of the pizzeria and the night shift. Possibly not long before the night shift, as only Freddy and the puppet had woken up at that point, and the office is empty. Another argument used to point suspicion to the phone guy is that he refers to others as workers and staff.
The staff literally had to put Foxy back together at the end of every shift. But the characters have been acting very unusual, almost aggressive toward the staff.
This seems odd as he doesn't talk about them as equals, despite them working for the same company. But there is another language oddity which seems to be ignored on how he refers to the company. He doesn't say they.
Some kind of criminal database so they can detect a predator a mile away. Heck, we should be paying them to guard you.
He doesn't say they should be paying you. He says we. On top of this, he's training you, having a lot of knowledge about how things in the company work, having a lot of knowledge about many things in the company, including some of the more behind-the-scenes things, such as the progress of the animatronics builds.
The idea at first was to repair them. They even started retrofitting them with some of the newer technology.
This leads me to think the phone guy is a manager of sorts. He refers to other employees as staff and workers, and not equals, because they're not. He's their boss. The we, he says, isn't a one-off either. He says it a lot throughout the game.
Those are from the previous location, and we just use them for parts now. There's been somewhat of an investigation going on. We may end up having to close for a few days. I don't know. When we get it all sorted out, we may move you to the day shift. a position just became available. We don't have a replacement for your shift yet, but we're working on it. We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was...
Now, another note about the Save Them minigame is that it's the only minigame that can be dated. It holds both copies of each animatronics, and is the exact layout of the Five Nights at Freddy's 2 building, meaning this definitely happened in Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Also, the investigation started on day 4.
There's been somewhat of an investigation going on. We may end up having to close for a few days, I don't know.
The investigation which is assumed to have led to the pizzeria's closure. So, this incident happened while you were working your first week on the job. Also note that, altogether, there are not 5 kids murdered, but more, unlike what the missing children incident is recorded. There are 5 in the Foxy minigame, 1 in the Take Cake to the Children, and a number of scattered bodies during Save Them. But what if the events of the death minigames aren't lined up like we think? So, picture this. During the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, specifically the evening of day 2. The reason it's day 2 specifically is because you hear about some rumours in the call of night 3, something you couldn't have known earlier.
Oh hey, before I go, I wanted to ease your mind about any rumors you might have heard lately. You know how these local stories come and go and seldom mean anything.
So, imagine this. The pizzeria closes for the night. Someone uses a yellow Freddy suit, as described by the phone guy in night 6, to lure children to the back room. What happened to those kids is still unknown. The Freddy animatronic wakes up as night approaches and starts to wander the halls as he's programmed to. While walking, a gruesome scene presents itself. During this walk, he bumps into the culprit. The culprit is holding a phone. The phone which has led many to believe that it is the phone guy. But if there's one thing I've learnt from Five Nights at Freddy's, it's don't assume. If you look on your desk during the game, you will see there isn't a wired phone. So how are you being called in the first place? Well, in the era the games are set, mobile phones were just being introduced. For the stationary job of the night shift, it's something that can be overlooked and not noteworthy. But for the day shift, where you have to be mobile, it's what would be a great investment for the company, especially for new members of staff who need to be briefed before their shifts. This leads me to stick to my guns, something I've mentioned in other theories based on other evidence given by the phone guy, that the culprit is none other than the day shift guy. The same one the phone guy mentions time and time again in varying suspicious ways.
No one is allowed in or out, you know, especially concerning any previous employees. When we get it all sorted out, we may move you to the day shift. A position just became available.
You'll notice through playing the game that from night 4 onwards, the game becomes increasingly difficult. The phone guy mentions that someone may have tampered with the animatronic's facial recognition systems.
Someone may have tampered with their facial recognition systems? We're not sure. But the characters have been acting very unusual, almost aggressive toward the staff. They interact with the kids just fine, but when they encounter an adult, they just stare.
When better to do this than after closing time, when the only person on would be the security guard, and before the night shift. Here's how things pan out in my mind. The day shift guy sees the place is relocating and are hiring due to expansion of the company before the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 2. The purple guy takes his chance and, wouldn't you know it, gets the job. He figures out you can't wear any of the animatronic outfits, but there is one costume, maybe for if the power goes out on the robots or to walk the shop floor, but either way, this costume doesn't have crossbeams, wires, and other components.
They'll probably try to forcefully stuff you inside a Freddy Fazbear suit. Now, that wouldn't be so bad if the suits themselves weren't filled with crossbeams, wires, and animatronic devices. especially around the facial area.
A yellow Freddy suit. The gruesome events unfold that would go down in history as the missing children incident. As he gets out of the Freddy suit, the phone rings. The phone guy, having the meek tick box mentality he has, calls up to check up on him, wondering why he hasn't checked out yet. Because, as we all know, the place gets pretty dangerous at night. The culprit answers and says he's about to leave, just got caught up with something. Just as this happened, Freddy turns the corner. This leads to a scuffle, but the culprit gets away. This leaves Freddy with 2 bloody handprints on his head. Why do I think this? Well, look at this picture. To have a neatly pressed handprint stain like that, the substance would have to be already on their hand before it was pressed down. Who else would have blood on their hand other than the culprit of the missing children incident? However, the murder during Take Cake to the Children is done during the day by someone not from the pizzeria, but rather comes from elsewhere. How is this? Well, look at where you are. It is considerably smaller than the minigame Save Them. There is also only one animatronic, the main one, Freddy Fazbear. Almost like the whole scene is in a smaller area. My thoughts? This place is before Five Nights at Freddy's 2, before the relocation. It is mentioned how the place of Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is rather bigger than the previous location. Also, the whole argument of the purple guy has to have extensive knowledge of the place to do this, I feel doesn't apply here. Because in this minigame, it doesn't happen from inside, but rather a man is in his car and sees his opportunity and takes it. The last thing to look at is the Foxy minigame. Here we see the purple man, not in uniform, smiling, as Foxy finds the remains of 5 children. The time cannot be determined. The location cannot be determined either, as there has been a Pirate's Cove in 2 known locations already. And because of this, the date cannot be determined either. Whether this happens before Five Nights at Freddy's 2, after Five Nights at Freddy's 2, before Five Nights at Freddy's 1, or after Five Nights at Freddy's 1, is unknown. Because of the 5 children, it can be assumed to be linked to the missing children incident. But as I said before, with this game, it's not wise to assume.